former head of Moscow's anti-doping laboratory, Grigory Rodchenkov, a key witness in the Russian doping scandal, failed to confirm a number of allegations against the country's athletes during his recent testimony at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Well, in February, the court had upheld the appeals of 28 Russian athletes banned for doping, and now it's given some of its reasons. So let's get some details now from Igor Zhidanov, who joins us in the studio. Igor, we were hearing that the court gave details concerning the case, didn't they, so far, of the Russian skier Alexander Lyagov. So what exactly was said and what is noteworthy about Rodchenkov's testimony?
Well, Andy, in the 2 years that we have been through this whole saga, it has almost become common knowledge that, well, Russia dopes. Every single Russian athletes, they dope. They take special drug cocktails like designer drugs. They swap dirty samples for clean ones through some hole in the wall and so on and so forth. Now, the foundation for all of these allegations was the testimony, well, more like tales of Grigory Rodchenkov. He was the key witness for the whole case and he made all of the allegations. But when he was questioned by the judges of the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is the highest judicial body in the world of sport, he actually admitted to, and let me quickly read it out, that he never administered the so-called cocktail himself. He never saw the said cocktail being administered by somebody else. He doesn't know, he couldn't explain how the cocktail was smuggled abroad to be used at international championships, and he's never been a witness to how clean urine samples were swapped for dirty ones and vice versa. Now, he did reveal that the allegations that he made in regarding to these points were basically him overhearing other colleagues or talking to other colleagues, but nothing of the sort was actually him seeing or doing things. Now, so basically his testimony showcased that the allegations are, well, circumstantial at best. But, well, 2 years is a long time, and in these 2 years, his words were just taken at face value, so to speak, and he himself was propelled to fame. He even starred in a Oscar-winning documentary about doping in Russia. I mean, here, have a taste.
I was helping to facilitate one of the most elaborate doping ploys in sport history.
Was Putin aware of the existence of a Russian doping system?
Yes. We are top-level cheaters.
That part of the Oscar-winning Icarus documentary about the whole saga. We should state, though, shouldn't we, Igor, that 11 Russian athletes continue to have their sanctions upheld by the CAS. So there was doping going on, but not the scale that everybody said it was going on by before. And we also know that Rodchenkov's testimony was the foundation of Richard McLaren's report, which was used to blanket ban a lot of Russian athletes, wasn't it? So what did McLaren have to say himself?
Well, indeed, McLaren also showed up in the court, and first and foremost, his report, he did not shy away to mention a lot of Russian athletes in his report, but testifying in front of the judge, he said that basically the fact that he chose to put an athlete in his report does not mean that he makes an accusation against that athlete. So basically, he does not shy away from making a mention in a very damning report of a very concrete athlete, but then he says that it doesn't mean that that said athlete participated in the doping scheme. Also, he could not explain to the judge as to why he trusted Rodchenkov and did not question his testimony. He did not reveal any of alternative sources that he claims he used to put together the report, and he could not explain as to why he believes the presumption of innocence did not apply to Russia or Russian athletes, and the ball, in his opinion, was in Russia's court to basically defend itself as a clean nation.
The sad thing here, isn't it, is that despite CAS taking the side of almost 30 Russian athletes, for many of them the damage has been done, hasn't it?
Well, indeed. This February, as you mentioned, 28 Russian athletes were cleared by CAS of all doping allegations, and though athletes were banned for their lifetimes from ever participating in any international events, including the Olympics, so they were cleared in February, just before the games in South Korea, and still none of them went. none of those athletes whose bans were fully overruled, none of them were invited by the International Olympic Committee to participate in the Games, although many of them were still acting, they still had their careers ongoing, and they would have loved to participate in the Games. They would have loved to take part, but none of that happened. So clearly a lot of careers stained, marred, and even ruined by that report, and so it's still yet to be seen as to where this whole thing fares.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Hugo. That was Artie Zhigozhidanov there. What we can get more reaction to from Ellis Cashmore. He's Professor of Sociology at Aston University and does avidly follow these doping stories too. Good afternoon to you, Ellis. Thanks for coming back on. Where does this leave Rodchenkov's testimony and his credibility, do you think?
I'd never thought his credibility was very strong in the first place, and I know that viewers of RT will have seen me over the last couple of years questioning his testimony all along. As you've just explained, the whole nucleus of the McLaren investigation and the ultimate report on the so-called state-sponsored doping rested on his testimony. And I questioned from the outset how objective or neutral or fair his testimony could have been. He's a fugitive. Let's put it, let's face it. The guy has fled from Russia. He does have an axe to grind. And so when McLaren based his evidence on the testimony from Rodchenkov, I remember saying several months ago, I'm a researcher. I do this thing for a living. If someone tells me a story, I want to substantiate that, or I want to, what we call, triangulate it by talking to other witnesses to see if it ties together. And McLaren didn't do this. So the answer to your question is that basically I never thought he'd had any credibility to begin with, and he has less still now.
And where does this leave the overall claim then that the whole country was doping? Because some people might argue, well, look, some sanctions remain against Russian athletes. You know, we're not saying there wasn't any doping, but it's the scale, isn't it? The scale of the accusation that was made to start with.
Let's not kid ourselves, Andrew. There is doping going on in Russia. No question about that. But it's going on in every other country in the world as well. So the scale of it, we don't know. The systematic operation that McLaren refers to, we don't know about that. What we do know is that Russia has denied any knowledge of this. And this has led to a kind of a standoff between Russia and the athletics governing organization, that is the IAAF, who is still saying Russia cannot compete on the world stage in athletics until it admits that there has been state-sponsored doping. So you have this ridiculous situation now where Russia is saying, we don't know anything about this state-sponsored doping. Why do you want us to confess to something we have no knowledge of? And as long as that standoff continues, Russia won't be readmitted to athletics. And of course, it's a world power in track and field. So the victim of this really is sport, as well as Russia. But I don't really see any immediate resolution to this problem.
Well, I mean, that's very true, because Russia's been told, look, you have to admit the findings of the McLaren report before you can get reinstated, hasn't it, or become compliant again. But it can't, can it, given what Rodchenkov's just said or hasn't said?
I was just about to, sorry, I'm going to bring in a colourful analogy. It reminded me of the old witch-finder general in the 17th century. You know, they used to travel around the country and in Britain and say, find old women who are suspected of witchcraft and say, look, if you confess to being a witch, we will just drown you. But if you don't, we'll burn you. So either way you lose. And Russia is losing both ways at the moment. Somebody has got to budge on this. And I think that the Court of Arbitration's ruling about the lack of credibility of Rodchenkov will actually make a few people at the IAAF, particularly Lord Coe, we hope, think twice about this decision, because it is absurd.
OK, Ellis, I could always talk to you a lot longer, but we've run out of time. Thanks very much for coming on to RT. That was Ellis Cashmore, Professor of Sociology at Aston University. Thank you.